Chapter 6. Other offenses or irregularities by public officers. Article 231. Open disobedience. Any judicial or executive officer who shall openly refuse to execute the judgment, decision or order of any superior authority made within the scope of the jurisdiction of the latter and issued with all the legal formalities, shall suffer the penalties of arresto mayor in its medium period to prison correctional in its minimum period, temporary special disqualification in its maximum period and a fine not exceeding 1,000 pesos. Article 232. Disobedience to order of superior officers, when said order was suspended by inferior officer. Any public officer who, having for any reason suspended the execution of the orders of his superiors, shall disobey such superiors after the latter have disapproved the suspension, shall suffer the penalties of prison correctional in its minimum and medium periods and perpetual special disqualification. Article 233. Refusal of assistance. The penalties of arresto mayor in its medium period to prison correctional in its minimum period, perpetual special disqualification and a fine not exceeding 1,000 pesos, shall be imposed upon a public officer who, upon demand from competent authority, shall fail to lend his cooperation towards the administration of justice or other public service, if such failure shall result in serious damage to the public interest, or to a third party. Otherwise, arresto mayor in its medium and maximum periods and a fine not exceeding 500 pesos shall be imposed. Article 234. Refusal to discharge elective office. The penalty of arresto mayor or a fine not exceeding 1,000 pesos, or both, shall be imposed upon any person who, having been elected by popular election to a public office, shall refuse without legal motive to be sworn in or to discharge the duties of said office. Article 235. Maltreatment of prisoners. The penalty of arresto mayor in its medium period to prison correctional in its minimum period, in addition to his liability for the physical injuries or damage caused, shall be imposed upon any public officer or employee who shall overdo himself in the correction or handling of a prisoner or detention prisoner under his charge, by the imposition of punishment not authorized by the regulations, or by inflicting such punishment in a cruel and humiliating manner. If the purpose of the maltreatment is to extort a confession, or to obtain some information from the prisoner, the offender shall be punished by prison correctional in its minimum period, temporary special disqualification and a fine not exceeding 500 pesos, in addition to his liability for the physical injuries or damage caused. Section 2. Anticipation, prolongation and abandonment of the duties and powers of public office. Article 236. Anticipation of duties of a public office. Any person who shall assume the performance of the duties and powers of any public officer or employment without first being sworn in or having given the bond required by law, shall be suspended from such office or employment until he shall have complied with the respective formalities and shall be fined from 200 to 500 pesos. Article 237. Prolonging performance of duties and powers. Any public officer shall continue to exercise the duties and powers of his office, employment or commission, beyond the period provided by law, regulation or special provisions applicable to the case, shall suffer the penalties of prison correctional in its minimum period, special temporary disqualification in its minimum period and a fine not exceeding 500 pesos. Article 238. Abandonment of office or position. Any public officer who, before the acceptance of his resignation, shall abandon his office to the detriment of the public service shall suffer the penalty of arresto mayor. If such office shall have been abandoned in order to evade the discharge of the duties of preventing, prosecuting or punishing any of the crime falling within Title I, and Chapter 1 of Title III of Book 2 of this Code, the offender shall be punished by prison correctional in its minimum and medium periods, and by arresto mayor if the purpose of such abandonment is to evade the duty of preventing, prosecuting or punishing any other crime. Section 3. Usurpation of powers and unlawful appointments. Article 239. Usurpation of legislative powers. The penalties of prison correctional in its minimum period, temporary special disqualification and a fine not exceeding 1,000 pesos, shall be imposed upon any public officer who shall encroach upon the powers of the legislative branch of the government, either by making general rules or regulations beyond the scope of his authority, or by attempting to repeal a law or suspending the execution thereof. Article 240. Usurpation of executive functions. Any judge who shall assume any power pertaining to the executive authorities, or shall obstruct the latter in the lawful exercise of their powers, shall suffer the penalty of arresto mayor in its medium period to prison correctional in its minimum period. Article 241. Usurpation of judicial functions. The penalty of arresto mayor in its medium period to prison correctional in its minimum period and shall be imposed upon any officer of the executive branch of the government who shall assume judicial powers or shall obstruct the execution of any order or decision rendered by any judge within its jurisdiction. Article 242. Disobeying request for disqualification. Any public officer who, before the question of jurisdiction is decided, shall continue any proceeding after having been lawfully required to refrain from so doing, shall be punished by arresto mayor and a fine not exceeding 500 pesos. Article 243. Orders or requests by executive officers to any judicial authority. Any executive officer who shall address any order or suggestion to any judicial authority with respect to any case or business coming within the exclusive jurisdiction of the courts of justice shall suffer the penalty of arresto mayor and a fine not exceeding 500 pesos. Article 244. Unlawful appointments. Any public officer who shall knowingly nominate or appoint to any public office any person lacking the legal qualifications therefor, shall suffer the penalty of arresto mayor and a fine not exceeding 1,000 pesos. Section 4. Abuses against chastity. Article 245. Abuses against chastity, penalties. The penalties of prison correctional in its medium and maximum periods and temporary special disqualification shall be imposed. 1. Upon any public officer who shall solicit or make immoral or indecent advances to a woman interested in matters pending before such officer for decision, or with respect to which he is required to submit a report to or consult with a superior officer. 2. Any warden or other public officer directly charged with the care and custody of prisoners or persons under arrest who shall solicit or make immoral or indecent advances to a woman under his custody. If the person solicited be the wife, daughter, sister of relative within the same degree by affinity of any person in the custody of such warden or officer, the penalty shall be prison correctional in its minimum and medium periods and temporary special disqualification.